Hello, welcome to the Energy Question. I'm your host, David Blackmon, and my guest today is return guest, I think for the third or fourth time on the show, Daniel Yergin, who is the vice chairman of S&P Global and renowned author of books like The Prize, The Quest, and most recently, The New Map, some of the greatest books ever written about oil and gas and energy in general. Dan, how are you today?
Fine, thank you. I'm glad to be on with you again, David.
Yes, it's always wonderful, and I really appreciate your time. Um, so we're recording this about 2 weeks, I think, before Ceraweek begins. In fact, exactly 2 weeks before the annual conference in Houston, Ceraweek, that you, I believe, created.
Yes, this is true.
Yeah, and have are the face of for all these years and organizer. I know that's taken all your time. Talk about what we can expect out of Ceraweek this year in terms of speakers and themes that you think will be
I think
addressed.
I think quite a broad range of speakers, from the Secretary of Energy to Walter Isaacson, biographer of Elon Musk, to Bill Gates, uh, plus all CEOs from across the energy industry, from majors, independents from around the world, from 85 countries, from uh, uh, technologists, big emphasis on innovation this year. And, the whole spectrum's there from oil and gas to wind to solar to new technologies. So it's really, I think people it really gives them a head start on understanding what's going to happen, what the future is going to be. So we put a lot of work into it, obviously organizing a conference at this scale. But every year we all learn a lot from it. And you meet, the serendipity, the people you meet there unexpectedly turn out to be very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's so good that it's held early in the year because it does, more than any other conference I think that takes place, it tells you where we are in just the global energy space, listening to all the discussions and speeches that come out of it.
Yeah. In
For
fact,
example,
if I could just give a few years ago, uh, the oil minister from one of the major countries in the Middle East said, well, there's Ceraweek and then there's everything else.
I agree with that actually.
Yeah.
During and after CERAWeek last year, I wrote like five different articles for various publications about what had happened there. So kept me really busy. And I wasn't even in attendance, that was just what I could follow online. And anyway, so last year, one of the overarching themes really at CERAWeek last year that I think that most everyone really took notice of was an increased emphasis on number one, oil companies going back to their core businesses and focusing more of their capital investment, you know, back on their core oil and gas businesses after several years indulging in other things. And then second, an emphasis on the need to enhance energy security. And you just wrote this great piece that was published at the S&P Global website, www.spglobal.com, called The Return of Energy Security. And I wanted to start by talking about the kinds of themes you address in that piece.
I think that there was a tendency, particularly during the pandemic, for people to just forget about energy security. Demand collapsed, prices collapsed, and it wasn't a concern. But then, people came out in the spring of 2021 with these, what we call linear scenarios about how energy transition, and then all the things happened, beginning with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, energy shocks, disruption of supply chains, inflation, interest rates, further, conflict in the Middle East, et cetera. And it really put energy security back on the agenda, not really on the agenda, but countries really scrambled. Countries that were just focused on wind and solar were suddenly, like Germany, going to Senegal and Canada saying, can you give us some LNG? Can you give us some liquefied natural gas? And people, this country saying, from the administration, could you increase oil production? And just we saw that around the world. China giving higher priority to energy security than climate in its 5-year plan. So all of these things were underscored the fact that, in fact, energy security is something that is a priority for countries. And we may be able to forget about it during some times, when prices are weak and demand is sluggish, but it's a very critical issue. And, you can talk about energy transition. You're not going to have an energy transition without energy security,
Yeah.
because among other things, you're going to get a big political backlash.
And that's really kind of happening in Europe right now, isn't it? I mean, we're seeing quite a lot of that in some of
Yeah,
the
you
countries.
see it in Germany, you see it in the Netherlands, where a party that came from nowhere, the Farmers Party, has, I think it's the largest party in the parliament right now.
Yeah.
Uh, the farmers were told you shouldn't use fertilizer. Well, thank you very much.
How many people would starve worldwide if we didn't use
Well,
fertilizer? I
exactly.
mean,
And what is fertilizer depends upon natural gas.
right, right. Nitrogen, ammonia-based fertilizers. Of course, LNG from the United States, since you mentioned Russia's invasion of Ukraine and that ongoing war, U.S. LNG has played a big role in ensuring countries like Germany can keep the lights on and keep homes heated during these winters over the past 2 years. I wonder, and I go back and forth on this since the Biden administration invoked this permitting pause on U.S. LNG infrastructure. I wonder what your view is on what kind of an impact that permitting delay or pause, they're calling it a pause anyway, could have on energy security, not just in Europe, but with, Asian U.S. customers
Well,
here in
I
the
think
coming years.
that, one of the things I focused in on in the new map was this extraordinary development of U.S. LNG. David, the first shipment of U.S. LNG, modern shipment, only left the U.S. in 2016. And now the United States is the world's largest exporter of
Yeah,
LNG. And LNG really, without U.S. LNG, Putin might well have succeeded with using the gas weapon to undermine the coalition in Europe supporting Ukraine. And he didn't count on U.S. LNG, which is about 40%, 40 to 50% of the total LNG now. And the US LNG was not really developed it was developed for Asian markets, not for Europe, but it turned out to be a lifesaver. In fact, I've described it as US LNG is now part of the arsenal of NATO. It's very important from a security point of view. So the pause, well, we'll know more about it. We'll hear from the Secretary of Energy about how they're thinking about the pause at Ceraweek. But I think uh, certainly a reaction in Japan. I mean, I've heard from senior Japanese, in fact, one participated in a seminar I run in Washington, really said, wait, you're telling us to stop importing Russian LNG, but now you're putting a pause. The administration, of course, notes that the U.S. is going to double its current capacity.
right.
So it's really a question about what happens around 2030. I think the Europeans are pretty surprised too, and I know Europeans are coming to Ceraweek to kind of try and understand what this pause means. We probably won't know until after the November election. Uh, you know,
Yeah, that's my concern. Are you concerned it could become not a pause, but a permanent halt, depending
well,
on how the election
to
goes?
new permits, I think if it did that, it would be destabilizing for the U.S. alliance system.
Yeah,
Would be for the Europeans, it would be quite alarming, and it would be, in fact, if it was a permanent halt, it would be in favor to Vladimir Putin. No one hates U.S. LNG more than Vladimir Putin.
yes.
He wishes it didn't exist. And, I have that great story in the new map when he started shouting at me at a conference when I asked
Yes.
him a question about shale. And he started shouting in front of 3,000 people saying shale is barbaric, it's terrible. Well, from his point of view, shale is bad news because it meant that Russian gas had a competitor from the US and that it would be something that would augment US influence around the world. It's one of the few positives in the trade relationship with China right now.
Yeah.
If you think about it. So, Putin has every reason to hate U.S. shale. So I'm hoping that, that there's an understanding that the shale revolution in the United States is not only about global markets, it's not only about revenues it brings to the United States, but it's also very geopolitically significant.
Yes. Yeah, and in your piece, you talk about, I'm as guilty as anyone, tending to focus on what's happening in the United States and Europe, the Western world, which is my orientation, of course. But you talk in your story, you have a whole section in that piece at SP Global about energy security in the global south and all these developing countries that really need to be able to rely on fossil fuels for their energy security for the coming, several decades at least. Isn't that really kind of maybe the most critical issue for those countries right now
Yeah,
in
because
Asia? And
energy supplies, energy security, energy availability, energy reliability are essential for their economic development. And they, have a different perspective. You take Germany as a $60,000 per person GDP. Senegal has $4,000. Well, they look at these issues differently and they see oil and gas as being very important. I thought one of the most significant recent statements just a few weeks ago is that Prime Minister Modi of India committed $67 billion to expand the natural gas supply system in India and to take natural gas from 6% to 15% of the energy mix, even as the energy mix becomes much bigger. Well, that's a pretty powerful statement about a different perspective than you might encounter in the state of California, to take a
so
break.
is it, yeah, and is a big piece of that plan, I assume, at least some part of that investment is designed to, use natural gas to get away from using so much coal in India. I know they built new coal
Yes,
plants over the past few years.
yes, exactly. Because India, like China, is very dependent on coal for generation.
Yeah.
So, $67 billion for India is a very big commitment. It's about natural gas. But then there's Germany, which is going to spend $17 billion to build up to 20 new electric generating plants based upon natural gas so they don't run out of electricity. It's just, so it's kind of reality.
So yeah, I think it's just, and one of the numbers that you used in your piece really struck me, which is that 82% of global energy currently is supplied by fossil fuels, by natural gas, oil, and coal. That is essentially the same percentage that existed 25, 30 years ago. And we've spent since then trillions of dollars on renewables and other alternatives to oil, gas, and coal, and really haven't made a dent. And so, uh, is there any reason to think the number 30 years from now is going to be substantially lower than that?
Uh, I think it will be lower because I think you'll see more deployment of wind and solar and battery storage, but it will be a bigger pie. So it'll
Yes.
still be very significant numbers. Uh, I was talking to in preparation for Ceraweek with the CEO of one country that has a $300 billion program to expand their oil and gas production between now and 2040. They're, the demand's going to be there. Now, it will be in different parts of the world. China may, may well plateau because they're pushing electric cars so fast. But you see kind of a mixed reaction to EVs in the United States.
Yeah.
4,000 car dealers wrote to the White House a couple of weeks ago saying, could you please put the brakes on EVs because people aren't buying them and we don't have the capacity to deal with them. And so, it's kind of a mixed picture. And even
Yeah.
even if every car today sold was an EV, probably 2035, you'd still have over 1 billion gasoline powered cars in the world.
And all the other uses, for oil and gas as feedstocks for all sorts of manufacturing processes and plastics and
Well,
you
and
mentioned
don't forget
fertilizers.
your Moderna and Pfizer vaccinations, which also,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
needed it. So, I mean, people just, I think, just don't understand how pervasive uh, uh, the use is and the significance.
Yeah, and so that kind of leads into the question about the whole energy transition question, which I understand we're supposed to be embarked upon. It doesn't appear to be really yet anyway have materialized into a real transition. It's more of a massive innovation and investment in new technologies that someday I guess could scale up and produce a transition. But EVs is a great example. There's so much disruption now. It just within that space with these car makers. Ford lost $5.7 billion last year on its EV division. Made up for that on its gas-powered cars and still turned a profit. But you kind of wonder how long investors in these big companies are going to be willing to bear those kinds of losses in a developing division when the market isn't really adapting the way it was supposed to adapt to them.
Well, I don't know how investors will react on the automobile industry, but clearly it has been a surprise for the American automobile makers, other than Tesla's, that the market is so tepid because they expect a stronger demand, especially with all these incentives. And remember, the administration was going to tighten the emission standards, which would make conventional cars more expensive. But there is there is definitely a political backlash against it, and people talk about, which I was surprised. I've only heard the term recently, the politicization of EVs as an issue. So, I live here in Washington. I see a lot of Teslas. I used to see a lot
Yes.
of Volvos. Now I see a lot of Teslas. And that's obviously by far the best-selling EV. But the others just haven't really gotten traction.
Yeah, it's so hard. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I mean, they're selling them, but they haven't gotten the scale of the consumer excitement that they expected.
Yeah, and for companies like Rivian and Fisker, who are direct competitors with Tesla, Tesla had a 15-year head start. First of all, they're not like Ford GM where they have these ICE car divisions that are highly profitable right now and more profitable than you're losing on your EV division. And so for those companies that are pure play EV companies, I mean, I think
I mean, we had a couple of years ago the founder of Rivian at Ceraweek, and he was very impressive. I mean,
yeah,
he
they're beautiful cars.
yeah, beautiful cars. I mean, and the people who have them go up, they said they love them. In fact,
Yeah.
this summer met somebody where we were for the summer on the East Coast, and he had driven his Rivian from San Francisco, and he said it's the best car he's ever had. And he took me for a spin in it. And so they're beautiful cars,
Yeah.
but it's hard to enter the market. Uh, Obviously, Tesla without an Elon Musk wouldn't have happened. I have that great story in the new map of that this fellow named J.B. Straubel was loved electric vehicles and things like that. Was having lunch with Musk in Los Angeles, trying to convince him in 2003 to do an electric airplane. He said, "I'm not interested." I said, "What about a car?" "Well, I might be interested." And he ended up doing Tesla. And then I quote in the book Musk saying, "If I hadn't had that lunch, Tesla might never have happened."
Yeah.
So kind of the accident. Now it was on a different path in China because you had another person there who had done a Chinese who had done a PhD in Germany, who came back to China, and eventually became Minister of Technology, who drove EVs in China. But for China, there were different. Then it was state policy because they're concerned about being overly dependent on imported oil, which comes to the South China Sea, worried about the US Navy. And also they realized that they could never be competitive with conventional cars because they were too late, but they could be competitive globally with EVs. And you see that happening now where the European companies are deeply worried about the advent of Chinese EVs in Europe. And they're certainly worried about them in this country too. And you just saw that the Biden administration has just decided to do some studies about where do the minerals that go into Chinese batteries come from. So I think there's going to be, the arrival of Chinese EVs in the global market could be very disruptive.
Yeah, in fact, there was an article I read last week. I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, actually, talking about how China is now embarking on establishing factories and plants in Mexico
Yeah.
to serve as a gateway into the United States market due to the U.S. Mexico Canada trade agreement that
Yeah.
has loopholes
It's
about,
absolutely happening. And by the
yeah,
way, I believe about 20% of the new cars sold in Mexico today are Chinese cars.
yeah, yeah.
They're
And
not,
it's,
they're not
that's
Chevys.
coming. Yeah.
They're not Chevys.
I don't know how that can be avoided really, given the political environment here in the United States and the balance of power between the two parties. It's hard to see how that is avoided ultimately in the automotive space in the United States, really, because it's going to be so difficult to do what you would have to do to disadvantage Chinese cars in this market. So we haven't done it on any other product from China. I don't know why we'd end up doing it with cars. I also wanted to get your views on Ukraine because as we record this today, there is still no agreement in the U.S. Congress on an additional funding bill. The president wants another $60 billion to help fund the war in Ukraine. And I wonder what you see as the geopolitical implications if Congress fails ultimately to uh, approve additional funding for U.S. support of that war.
I think it will have, I mean, I'm a student of history and I read history. I think it would have really severe consequences in terms of America's leadership and confidence in America in the world. I mean, this system of alliances and delivering on them has been very important for global stability. I think would be in a more dangerous world. And I think other countries would take that as a sign that they can do what they want to do. Look at Venezuela now threatening Guyana. This sort
Yeah.
of, it sounds like Putin threatening Ukraine. Same sovereignty issue. So I hope that there is an agreement because I think failing to do that will, there are many unintended consequences, including beyond the tragedy for Ukraine that would follow from that.
Another topic that of course has been hot now for a couple of months is the disruption of shipping traffic in the Red Sea and Suez Canal due to the activities of the Houthi rebels in Yemen and the inability of the U.S. and British navies to really tamp that down. We have all this disruption in shipping traffic, and I think we're starting to see now some price impacts in gasoline in the U.S. from all that as those cargoes that had to go around Africa start landing here. But it's interesting to me that the crude oil price markets haven't really reacted as much as you might have expected to that disruption. And I wonder, love to have your view on why
Yeah.
that is.
Well, I think first, the Red Sea, it's interesting. It was a kind of minor waterway for oil, but with the sanctions on Russian oil, it became quite significant.
Yeah.
In 2022, 2023, before this started, about 40, an equivalent to about 40% of the amount of oil that goes through the Strait of Hormuz was going through the Red Sea. Now it's way down because of insurance costs and and the risk. And I guess the ship is actually sinking now as we talk. But really, so we really have three wars going on. We have a war in Ukraine, war in Gaza with Hamas, and call it the proxy war with Iran's proxies, including Houthis. And yet, so far, it could change tomorrow, of course. We haven't seen an impact on world oil. It's been a disruption, but not a severe disruption. I think there are three reasons I think that the price hasn't gone up. One is the relative weakness of the Chinese economy. It's not as strong as people thought its demand. The other David, goes to what we were talking about before, the shale revolution. In general, we see that the Western Hemisphere, the balance in the world oil markets changed. The growth is coming from the Western Hemisphere. The US, Canada, Brazil, Guyana, adding more new oil than demand growth in the world. And of course, the biggest by far is the shale revolution. US over 1 million barrels a day in 2023. Canada significantly adding supplies. So I think it's this kind of rebalancing to the Western Hemisphere being more influential in the oil market. And the other thing I would add is, in particular, I think again it shows the geopolitical significance of the shale revolution.
Yeah.
How important it's been as a stabilizer. And I don't think that's very well recognized by many people in this country.
And of course, the other province in the Western Hemisphere that is really dramatically increasing production is the northern coast of South America with Guyana and Suriname developments down there. I was going to joke. I hope Darren Woods and Mike Worth are both going to be at Ceraweek so we can hear what they have to say about
well, I don't know what they'll say about that, but both of them will be at Ceraweek.
Yeah. I'm joking. I know they can't really talk about it publicly. Believe me, I tried to get interviews from both those companies when that all broke last week, but haven't been successful.
No comment.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're bumping up against time here. I thank you so much. I never cover half of what I want to cover in these things, but also want to respect your time and really appreciate it. I know it's going to be a whirlwind 3 weeks for you here.
Yeah, it's really coming up, but it's a great conference, and a lot of things I don't know if everything will be clear, but a lot of things will be clearer. And I think this theme of the multidimensional energy transition as a theme to rephrase and think about the complexities of the energy transition, and it's going to be multi-fuel in it, I think is something that would be very helpful for thinking about the future of energy. And of course, oil and gas, and particularly what happens in the US, will be very significant not only for the markets, but for world politics.
Well, Dan, thank you. I wish you the best and look forward to talking to you again in a few months.
Well, thank you, Dave. I'm very glad to be on with you again.
And thanks to the Sandstone Group for hosting our podcast and to our extraordinary producer, Eric Perel. I'm David Blackmon. That's all for now.